We are independent. We are not part of government. Unfortunately, our email address has GovTas in it, but that's because we simply can't afford to run our own computer system. I saw a newspaper recently say the Government's Integrity Commission, well, I reject that completely. It's an independent body. We are completely independent of the government. We do because of the
When you say that, Murray, should anybody be totally dissatisfied and you do a sort of like unsatisfactory job, could a member of government fire you?
Can I come back to that? We'll come back to that. We are independent, and there's good reasons why we should be. And by independence, what I mean is not independence from accountability. I mean independence from pressure. That is, the government cannot, and while I'm here, won't be permitted to say, you do investigate this or you don't investigate. It's independence in that sense. And the independence has really got nothing to do with my position, my job, Barbara's job, or anyone's job. Independence is a protection for the public, that we're not acting with fear, by reason of fear or by reason of favour.
Well, with you, particularly with Barbara's similar role, which was supposed to get airborne on July 1 and didn't get airborne until October 1, if I can be absolutely sort of like probably out of line, what did Barbara do for those couple of months? Was she squatted around by politicians? Was she sitting in the car?
Let's have questions later. Let me deal with my issue, and I'll answer that question.
Right.
At the end of the day, our system of government depends upon whether those in public administration can be trusted to act with integrity, do their jobs honestly, can be trusted not to allow private interests to interfere, and to provide services that are effective and proper. There is an issue about efficiency. We simply don't have power to examine whether something being done by a government is efficient. That's a matter that might be within the realms of the Auditor General. It certainly might also be within the jurisdiction of the Ombudsman. But some of the complaints we get are really about inefficiency, perhaps even negligence, that aren't within our jurisdiction. Now, sure enough, it might be that negligence is associated with misconduct. It might be that a series of incidents that are grossly negligent could add up to impropriety. But a simple case of negligence is not.
What about criminal conduct?
Criminal conduct, if it is criminal, we have the power to refer that to the DPP. Yes. But what's criminal and what's not, of course, is
putting false documents into a court case?
Well, there is a problem with that. Bringing false documents into a court case could well be. If that's what happened,
yes.
It could be perjury, it could be criminal.
Nobody would take any notice of it.
Well, we don't have any power under our legislation to inquire into the conduct of courts, tribunals. If you look at the Act, there is a group of people who are exempt from our jurisdiction.
Thank you. That hasn't been said before.
It's in the Act that we don't have the power. The courts, tribunals, the governor and a number of other bodies are not subject to our jurisdiction. So there's a group of people who might be connected with what you'd say the public sector that are not subject to our jurisdiction. Likewise, Parliament. We can't inquire into something that's happened in Parliament. We can't inquire what's happened to something in the court. But if it was in another, not a court, use of a false document in some other way that was dishonest would be within our jurisdiction.
In other words, dishonesty is quite okay in our courts.
Well, there's a different process there. You speak to the politicians why they lift the courts out. I think there's a good reason, I might say. There's an appellate structure in a court system.
But the appellate structure won't address it.
Well, that's a matter that we really need to take up with the politicians. Our position is we do not have the power to interfere in court proceedings. And I think there is really an identifiable and justifiable philosophical basis for that. You either have a court system that deals with its issues.
Well, in Tasmania is not very, very good impressive.
Well, I won't enter into that debate. Thank you for the contribution, but I won't enter into the debate.
Well, I think what he meant was he would be relying on you to give him a brick to build a foundation for the court case.
Well, we'll see about that later. We'll have a discussion about that later. Where is our focus? Our primary focus is on education. Now, I know you can be critical of that. You can say you can lead a horse to water and you can't make it drink, but there's not a lot of education at that's been going on at the moment. And for instance, I spoke to school students today. Nothing about these sort of things being taught in civics. No education of this nature. The sort of things we're talking about here are being taught to school kids. Seems to me that that's part of education. It's not part of our education because that's outside of our public sector responsibility. There should be induction programs for people who get positions in council. There should be induction programs for those that are serving on council. So education is very significant from our viewpoint. There's a prevention and an advisory role. So that's the educational aspect of it. We're dealing at the moment, very nearly completed a code of conduct which will be presented to Parliament, which will be applicable to all members of Parliament. And there will be other programs being rolled out over the forthcoming period of time. We have a complaint jurisdiction, and as I said, we have no organised crime jurisdiction. Our jurisdiction, to a degree I've discussed this, we have a misconduct and a serious misconduct jurisdiction. Public officers, relevant public authorities are all subject to our jurisdiction if they or an individual has been guilty, I'm using that word very broadly, of misconduct and or serious misconduct. We're talking about public servants, we're talking about state government and associated bodies, we're talking about government business enterprises, as well as all of the local governments in Tasmania. In addition, we have to work by our definition that's given to us by Parliament. Misconduct is defined by legislation as dishonest or improper conduct, misuse of information, materials or public resources, conduct that affects the honest and proper performance of another public officer, and breach of a code of conduct. And as I said earlier, that does not include conduct in connection with a proceeding in Parliament that's specifically excluded by our legislation, as is interference by us in the processes of any court process and tribunal. So I think that probably that latter point and the issue of the courts is pretty consistent with the separation of powers, with the independence of the judiciary and with the independence of Parliament, and it doesn't surprise me that our legislation is as it is in that regard. We have power over serious misconduct, which, if proven, could be a crime, and we have power to investigate. We don't have power to punish it. We have power to refer to the DPP. Or if it's misconduct which provides reasonable grounds for termination of employment, again we have power to investigate that. And again, we don't have any punishment power, we have a referral power. And then finally in the end, if that sort of misconduct isn't dealt with by a public body, the power we've got is that of report to Parliament. I've been talking a bit about misconduct.
Can I just ask a question about reporting to Parliament?
Yeah.
If we report to Parliament and Parliament chooses to do nothing, then that's the end of it, I think.
That's the end of it. That's the end of it.
So you can... okay.
That's right.
It doesn't give you a great deal of power, does it?
Well,
to do anything.
I'm not so sure about that. I know the point you're making. Toothless tiger, yes. You might say. But when reports are lodged in Parliament, let me tell you some of my past experience. I was chair of our parole board in Victoria for quite a period of time. We didn't have much power to do much in terms of resources and things for prisoners, but the reporting Parliament each year got front page news. Now, I think that's where the strength of it is. That the press will be pretty interested, I think, in reports to Parliament. One of the powers we have got under the Act, when I was running the parole board, we had under the power to produce an annual report. So if there's something you're pretty unhappy with, something I was unhappy about, I put it in the annual report. And of course, what Parliaments can do if they're swamped with 20 annual reports one day, well, yours mightn't get looked at by the press for a while. But we also have power under our Act to file a report at any time. And I think I hear what you say. That's true. We don't have penalty powers, we don't have powers to impose fines, we can't sack somebody, but if there was something that we felt pretty strongly about, and we tabled a report in Parliament. I'd be very surprised if the media weren't interested in it. I think that's the strength of it.
But you don't have an obligation to file an annual report?
Yes, we do. Yes, we've got an obligation to file an annual report. The point I'm making is that in addition to that...
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. But yes, we do. We have an obligation to file an annual report. Misconduct. There's no doubt the financial cost of misconduct is high. Just I'll give you a second. Certainly, the cost of dealing with corruption, if you want to use that word, leads to the loss of huge amounts of money, and that's been clearly demonstrated in an international sense. I think probably the most significant thing from the Tasmanian viewpoint is, leave aside the dollars that have been lost by reason of that sort of misconduct, it's the lack of trust that has been engendered in the community, in those who are elected or employed. Yeah.
You have the power to investigate a breach of code of conduct. Does that go as far as investigating somebody who may be breaching the Act of Parliament that governs?
Yeah, if you're talking, well, no, the code of conduct is a specific document that is adopted. Some councils have code of conduct, codes of conduct. State public service has a code of conduct. I think every state public servant in this state is subject to a code of conduct which is applicable to all. Then there might be varying codes of conduct. For instance, government members have one, not all parliamentarians.
So an Act of Parliament or the Corrections Act, somebody's
Right, not necessarily. That's not a code of conduct, that's an Act of Parliament. And a breach of that Act wouldn't necessarily come under our jurisdiction. It might well, if it was dishonest or if it was improper. But a breach of the Act by itself might not, because it might not be misconduct. It might be negligent, it might be incompetent, it might be all sorts of things. So there is a division between the powers we've got in terms of misconduct and the breach of an Act. If the breach of the Act is accompanied by dishonesty or impropriety or improper motives, which is often very hard to investigate and tell, of course, yes, it would be within our jurisdiction. But the breach of an Act might be, it might not be. A public servant for speeding just over the speed limit is probably breaching the Motor Car Act, but probably wouldn't come into our territory because it's not necessarily dishonest or improper to the degree we're talking. He breached the Act of the Road Traffic Act. But, see, Williams?
No, I hear what you're saying, but it's can of worms.
Can of worms, okay, well, lots of cans of worms. But we've got to live by our legislation. And I mean, I think there's a serious threat to the community if we don't. That's our legislative power. We accept it, and that's what we've got to do.
Do you feel declawed?
Sorry?
You feel declawed?
No, I don't feel declawed. This is a new organisation. Things will develop and we'll see where we end up. In fact, to answer that question, the major criticism of bodies of this description, and Queensland's had one since the Fitzgerald inquiry, I'm sure it's a crime commission too. Western Australia's had one in recent years. New South Wales has had one for a long time. The major criticism of those bodies, invariably by people in power who do not like scrutiny, is they've got too much power, or they've exceeded their power, or they've abused their power. Now, I'm very concerned to make sure that this body does not come to grief for those reasons. And so, no, I don't feel declawed. I think in our territory, which is public service, public sector, the tools we've got are sufficient.